Macca's Guides.
Hey guys, Macca here. Welcome to my top 5 most underappreciated games of 2016. Unlike my top 10 hardest or easiest or even my top 10 games of the year, this one is a little less serious than those. I just kind of took 5 games that I think not a lot of people know about, 5 games that might not have the best reputation, and 5 games that I think deserve to be played, and I smashed that all together and came up with 5 games that I think don't get enough praise or enough of a spotlight as a good game, and I'm going to be recommending them to you and telling you the reasons as to why I'm doing that. This was an idea I first mentioned 2 years ago when I said that The Crew was really underrated, and then a video idea that I acted on last year where I named Rainbow Six Siege as the most underappreciated game of 2015, and I must say, I think I did a pretty good job. It is a spectacular shooter at this point, and one of the few games that have ever had a larger player base 1 year into them than when they first started. And I think I was pretty on the money with that call. Hopefully I'm doing all right this year as well. Let's just get straight into the list. Here's number 5. In at the number 5 position, I have the Turing Test, which is probably one of my favorite puzzle games of the year, rivaling The Witness and Superhot. Now, Portal 2 is one of my favorite games of all time, but as time progresses, I lose hope more and more that we're ever going to see a Portal 3 and have to rely on other puzzle games to fill that void. And in many ways, the Turing Test did that for me. Now, as you can clearly tell from the gameplay on the screen, the Turing Test is a first-person puzzle game where you use a gun in order to manipulate balls of energy in order to figure out the puzzles so that you can get to the end of the level and so on. And the game has about 70 of these rooms in which you need to figure out how to get out of. And in a lot of ways, the Turing Test surprised me because visually it's nice to look at, the audio is very well done, the puzzles are very creative, imaginative, and fun to complete, and the story is actually somewhat engaging. Now, the reason that I think this game might have been overlooked by a lot of people was because it didn't get that much press, it didn't have that much buzz surrounding its release, and it's also made by the same people who made Numa, which was not the greatest game, although it had a lot of good ideas going for it. I think a lot of people were disappointed by that, so they didn't really think much of this game. And although I probably wouldn't recommend Numa to the average person, I would recommend the Turing Test to the average puzzle fan, especially if you like the game like Portal. Now, no, this game doesn't actually have portals, and most of the puzzles aren't physics-based, but the way you approach the puzzles and figure them out, and the sense of accomplishment you get as you complete them, and the engaging story as you go from room to room, all of that together as a package is really well done, and I really appreciated this game for what it was able to do this year, and that's why I would recommend it, and I think it was overlooked in the grand scheme of things, so if you haven't checked it out, I'd probably consider it. Next up on the list at number 4, I have Gemini Heroes Reborn, and most people outside of the achievement community won't really know what this game is at all. Remember that show Heroes from the mid-2000s? I think this game's supposed to be loosely based on that, but honestly I have no idea why the two are related and why this game came out. But with that being said, it's actually pretty decent in my opinion for its price range and with what it's trying to accomplish. Now I'm going to make a quick comparison to another game, and that game is Titanfall 2. If you don't want to be spoiled at all in Titanfall 2, stop listening for about 5 seconds. But this game is very reminiscent of the time travel level from Titanfall 2, literally almost identical. The premise here is that you have superpowers that allow you to switch between 2 different times, and you're going to be using that game mechanic in order to figure out a way through the level and also in order to defeat the enemies that stand in your way. Now look, I'm not saying this game is incredible or great, but I do think it's good and it is unique. And obviously it is a budget title, which is why it comes in at $15. I'm not even necessarily telling you to go out and buy this game. I'm just saying that I think it's underrated, and I don't think anyone even knows of its existence, and it's actually decent, and it has a lot of cool hints of other really popular games that I enjoyed, like BioShock. It's obvious the game was made with a low budget, and it is a little bit linear, but that doesn't stop it from being fun, which is why it's on my list. In at the number 3 position is the only game that was mentioned in my top 10 games of the year, and that is Virginia. Virginia is a truly unique game, and it gets a lot of flack for being a little bit artsy-fartsy, and it also gets a lot of flack for being like the definition of not a game, because it plays a lot like a movie. However, I do think it is a little bit overlooked, underrated, and underappreciated for a couple of reasons. Like I've already said, the game is truly unique, which is definitely a plus. I think the graphics are nice to look at, and the music is absolutely incredible. How this game didn't win multiple Soundtrack of the Year awards is mind-boggling to me. I also found the story very intriguing and very thought-provoking, which is not something I can say about a lot of story-driven games that I've played. And that's really about it. Those are the reasons that I think it's a little bit underappreciated, although I know it is a very niche game and that a lot of people don't enjoy it because of how simplistic it is in terms of its gameplay. For me, it is something that I think most people should experience as long as they're willing to maybe not be as entertained as I was. Next on my list at the number 2 position is a game that was cut at the last minute from my top 10 games list, and that is Oxenfree, a game that I really enjoyed and I think is one of the coolest experiences that you can have in a video game in 2016. Now, for most people who have played this game, the fact that it's good shouldn't come as a surprise or a secret. I think most people who've played it have enjoyed it. For example, it has a 96% positive rating on Steam user reviews. For those who don't know, Oxenfree is a mystery adventure game based on supernatural elements. Now, Oxenfree is also a game that is based solely on its story, which is something that usually doesn't capture me, but in this case, it did. I think some of the reasons it did that is because of the twists and turns of the story and the fact that you don't see a lot of things coming. Additionally, I think the voice acting was incredibly well done. The game is very visually appealing and it feels fresh and like something you haven't played before. The gameplay has you exploring the island in order to put together the story, as well as interacting with other players through dialogue options that actually affect their responses. However, Oxenfree is also a game where if you know too much going in, it will probably hinder the experience and make it worse, which is why I don't want to say too much, and which is why it's also really hard to market to people who are on the fence about it. I will say that I do recommend it. I will say it's unique. I will say that I don't know if it's for everyone, but I highly recommend it, and I think it is critically overlooked. In at my number 1 position for the most underappreciated game of the year is a game that I think is criminally underrated, and that is Steep. Now, there are a few reasons as to why I think Steep has a little bit of a weird reputation. Number 1, I don't think Ubisoft did it any favors through marketing, as it basically pretended that the game didn't exist at times. Another thing is that people had this random assumption where it would play like SSX, which it doesn't. You can't go into Steep and pull off a quadruple backflip right away, but if you put the time into it, you will be able to eventually. Now, Steep is at the top of my list for a lot of the same reasons that Rainbow Six was at the top of my list last year, and that's because the core gameplay, what the game shipped with, is excellent. But there are a lot of problems that are going to turn people off when they start. A couple of things that I think the game did very poorly, for example, is the tutorial, which is one of the worst tutorials I've ever played in my life, and the UI, or the user interface of how you interact with the mountain and the map, which I think is also done really poorly. Based on the fact that these are the first 2 things you'll see when you start off the game, we're not off to a good start. Another thing that makes a big difference is how you play it. And one of the problems with the tutorial is that it never actually tells you how they want you to play it and what makes the game most enjoyable. With that being said, I will say that Steep is most enjoyable if you're willing to put the time into it to learn the fundamental game mechanics of how the sports work, and then what you're going to want to do is play the game in order to get gold medals in the events, and restarting those events as soon as you screw up and trying to get that perfect run in, similar to a game like Trials. You will at times find yourself frustrated, sometimes by the controls and sometimes by the unpredictable way that your skier or snowboarder behaves as you're ripping it down the mountain. But on the opposite end of that frustration is the absolute joy you get out of getting a perfect gold medal run on a really hard event. If you're willing to look past the UI problems, and if you're willing to learn the game from the ground up on your own without the tutorial, Investing the time into this game makes it really enjoyable. There's a great sense of progression, there's a great sense of feeling rewarded, feeling like you're getting better at the game, unlocking new cool outfits, and getting further and further into the mountain until you can claim every event. There's also a lot of variety, whether you're doing tricks in a park or trying to wingsuit through a narrow tunnel of rock. You might even find yourself racing down an abandoned bobsled track. But the game will ask you to invest a lot of time into it before you can get to those cool sections. It'll also require you to have a lot of skill if you want to get the most out of it, so we're cutting the potential player base down and down and down until there's only a small pool of players who can get the full experience out of it. With that being said, I am definitely one of the players who is fully invested into Steep. I've spent about 30 hours in the game and have chose to play it over games like Final Fantasy and Dead Rising because of how much fun I have trying to get these gold medals on hard events. After investing the time in, the core gameplay feels right, and I have a ton of fun playing this game, but at the same time, it has this really bad reputation, it has generally bad reviews, and there are people who aren't enjoying it, which is why it tops my list as the most underrated, underappreciated, and overlooked game of 2016. Alright guys, thanks for watching the countdown. Do me a big favor and in the comments down below, let me know one game that you think everyone deserves to play, and maybe a game that not a lot of people have played. An idea similar to this, but on the complete opposite end, that I might do next year is the biggest gaming disappointments of the year. And examples of that for me this year were games like No Man's Sky, Quantum Break, Mirror's Edge. These were games that I think had a lot more potential than what they lived up to, and maybe we'll make that a countdown next year. Thank you so much for watching again. Leave a like if you found the video entertaining or somewhat informational. Special thanks to Drop Dead Artemis for supporting the show on Patreon, and hopefully I see you guys in the next video. Peace.